All right, everyone. Welcome to our SLAC event. My name is Caden, and I will be the moderator for today's debate. Today's topic has, in some ways, quite literally shaken the world. As our topic evolves, as our society evolves, so should our policy and the way we treat each other and the way that we interact with politics. The question today, of course, is election reform. And this debate might get a bit excited, so I remind everyone to stay civil, not to talk over each other, and remember that we're all friends here, regardless of our viewpoints. Okay, so here are the rules. Your team is going to have 10 minutes to present your proposal, and then after everyone's gone, we're going to field some questions from our viewers in the live chat. Make sure everybody's with us. Then there's going to be a grand crossfire, and that will lead us to the last segment of the debate, where we will determine any conclusions, and hopefully we'll be able to agree on some things and lay down the groundwork for some sensible policy. Myself and our other moderator Mila, say hi, Mila, will be timing and guiding you as we go, as well as answering any questions that may come up, and just overall ensuring a level of cohesion in the debate. So first, a little bit of overview of the topic, and then we are going to go right up ahead. Today's debate in our first series of debates, today's debate is the first in our series of debates centering around election reform. According to recent polling data, many Americans don't feel like there are candidates who actually stand for what they believe in on election day. Surely such candidates must exist. So how can we modify the election process to better represent the will of the people? The way that America votes has become a serious issue, and in an election year, these issues are brought to the forefront of our minds. So let's get started and see what our debaters have come up with. And hopefully, let's come to consensus here. So the first team is our debater Siddharth and his partner Samuel. So I'm going to go ahead and yield them the floor. And good luck, guys.
Thank you. I will start. America knows what it's like to have its people's voices silenced at the hands of a government that does not want to hear them one bit whatsoever. The U.S. itself. America went to war over the right to consent to your own government, eventually breaking through glass ceiling after glass ceiling, and granting this right to everyone through equal access to voting. However, today we see this right being turned into that of a barrier at another, and because I cannot stand to see myself on one side and more American than ever before on the other, we need to take the first step in shattering this glass and resolve to make Election Day a national holiday. There are two reasons to enact a resolution. For starters, it's to solve issues regarding equality and staffing at polling locations. Next, we'll be examining how these issues are being fabricated within the status quo. Right now, America is currently facing a chronic shortage of voters actually showing up to their polls to vote. The Pew Research Center in 2018 reported that in the 2016 national election, only half of our eligible voters actually ended up casting their ballot. However, this isn't necessarily the root cause of the issue. We have a lack of voter turnout specifically because voting is inaccessible to so many Americans. Time Magazine 2020 explains that between 2013 and 2018 midterm elections, the US saw that 10% of its polls closed nationwide, and in just one state, up to 85,000 eligible voters simply weren't able to make it to a poll, rather because the nearest one was either too far or simply just didn't exist at all. Then, the Washington Post in 2014 tells us the story of Americans who weren't able to show up to their polling locations due to complications with their schedules. It reports that 2/3 of Americans were not able to vote during the 2014 midterm elections as a result of a work and school holding them back. Along with that, the Washington Post in 2018 then goes on to explain that 13.9% of our workforce currently cannot afford to take a day off just to go vote. And when people can't make it to vote and be active, their registration gets purged. The Brennan Center in 2018 reported that between 2014, 16 million voters were purged from their rights to vote. But 2 million of those votes could have been saved if voting was merely just more accessible. The cherry on top is when Americans who were able to access a poll are prohibited from volunteering at polling locations. And CNN in August of this year explains how states are scrambling to recruit poll workers, which an MIT professor states to be the biggest and largest disruptor of the upcoming election. Retirement, the number of volunteers that enable election day to run smoothly are rapidly decreasing. Soon enough, we can't really rely on old age homes to keep the polls alive. Think about the people who give you stickers when you go to vote. Soon enough, if we do not pass this legislation, the stickers you got last time will be the last ones that you'll ever receive. So what we see happening right now is as voting becomes harder and harder and more tedious, less Americans are able to vote and even less care about it at all in the first place. A lack of facilitation of easy voting is pushing people out of the polls, breaking down American values with each passing election and keeping people from exercising their rights. My partner will take the rest of the speech from here.
However, let's take a closer look at how our resolution would solve these issues today. To start off, we've seen it work before. Pew Research Center 2018 cites that in Israel and South Korea, which have already made Election Day a national holiday, and their voter turnout jumped to 72.3% and 77.2% respectively, which is roughly 30% higher than the United States average voter turnout now. According to BBC in 2015, when Singapore made Election Day there a national holiday, voter turnout to the 2015 election jumped out over 90%. So there's no doubt about it. Making Election Day a national holiday simply works to get. First, we begin to solve the indifferent mentality of eligible American voters today. When people have an allocated day to vote, they remember their obligation as a U.S. citizen to exercise their right to participate in their government. Next, we make voting more accessible to those who can't make it to a poll in the first place. Federal employees would then be able to take the time to go and cast a ballot towards the very government which they work for, as well as every other U.S. citizen who rightfully prioritizes their income over a piece of paper with a politician's name on it. We also give people the chance to go and participate in their local polls through volunteering, ensuring that every single person who now has the time to vote can. Before we take further steps to equalize voting once and for all, we need to change the mindset of the Americans. We need to turn the popular eye to what might as well be the most important act of public service a citizen can perform in their lifetime. Americans were once divided, as we are now, but united under the need to have a voice in their governance. Once upon a time, Americans cared about voting and making it available for the masses. Once upon a time, we went to war over representation, but let's bring it back to the present. Right now, we don't have that representation. We don't have that representation not because it's not necessary, but because it's no longer accessible. Thousands of Americans are stuck behind a wall of soundproof glass, either deaf to their duty as an American citizen calling or unable to break through the glass and take a hold of their future that's right in front of them. Enacting our proposal ensures that glass can be taken down by first turning the minds and the eyes of the American people back to election day. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Now at this time, I believe we're going to take some questions for the live chat. So we're gonna take a little teeny tiny pause to give it a second to catch up. So let's just give it 1 second for questions to roll in.
Awesome. Looks like we got a question in the YouTube live chat. So, how do federal holidays force employers to give people time off?
Sam, did you want to take that one or should I take it?
My siblings are being allowed, so you can take it.
Okay. So the way federal employers, they don't really necessarily, you can't force an employee to take the day off. If the whole, like for example, if it's a national holiday, what that means is that there's not going to be, nobody's going to go to school that day, nobody's going to go to work that day. There's a day off where people stay at home, and in this case, they would go out to the polls to vote. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, it appears as if, thank you, by the way. It appears as if that was the only question from the live chat. So now we're going to go into some debater questioning. So we are going to allow the other team to just ask some questions of the first team, just a few, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then that second team is going to go ahead with their speech.
Okay, so I'll go with a question that kind of bounces off what we just had in the chat. So a lot of national time off for a lot of private workers. So like a lot of private companies still are open on, say, like Columbus Day, and students are still going to school on those days. So how would shifting it to make it a national holiday actually give time off for those people?
Well, first, for starters, students would be allowed to have the days off for school. And I guess we'd make the argument that as a result of students being able to take off from school and like not having school on those days, parents would also have to take off in order to watch these kids. As a result of not working, they would be able to use this time to go to election polls and vote.
All right.
Hey guys, great job. Also, in your speech, you talk a little bit about how making Election Day a national holiday is going to bring out people who don't normally vote to actually vote, regardless of accessibility. But why would people who currently aren't incentivized to go to the polls suddenly will be incentivized once Election Day is a national holiday?
So, Dara, do you want me to take this?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay. So I feel like making Election Day national holiday would bring awareness to the cause, because I feel like a lot of people are disincentivized from voting on Election Day, feel that it's not necessarily as important, but making it a national holiday through the hands of the federal government would bring awareness to the concept and make people realize the importance and the value that voting does have.
All right. So thank you guys. So if the second team is satisfied with the questions that they've asked for the time being, then we can go ahead and move on to the second proposal. So is everybody all good?
Can everyone hear me? Oh,
yeah.
are we not going yet?
You know, something had occurred to me actually that I might ask a question. Just to try to get this first team I just want to hear what they think about it. So, do you think it's possible that rather than requiring an incentive to vote, that this solution actually doesn't add an incentive, but rather it just removes the de-incentive to vote? I mean, that's what I feel like is going on. But let me know what you guys think. So, like, what is actually being accomplished?
Great. So that was a great question, by the way. So what exactly is being accomplished in the sense is that now that Election Day is a national holiday, all the children who go to school have the day off. So, for example, those 12th graders and those students who are 16 above, now they obviously, if they skip school, then they're going to get in trouble. They're going to get marked absent, which is why a lot of those teenagers don't get out and vote. Now that school is a day off, they actually have the time to, whether their parents take them to a voting poll, or they can drive themselves to a voting poll. Somehow they can get to a voting poll and cast their vote for who should run our country. Not only that, but in terms of, like you said, the incentive, it's been shown from various sources that in countries such as Puerto Rico, election day is actually celebrated like a celebration, like a party, like, you know, where we have on the street, kind of like that. In Puerto Rico, that's what they do for election day. They have like these huge, like, I don't know what you call them, like those little rafts, that's what I'm going to call them, that come down the street playing like live music, patriotic music. There's lots of food, celebration, joy, and happiness. And that's one of the reasons. That motivation is what gives Puerto Rico's voter turnout. It's such a high number. And so if we think about it in the United States here, a voting day or election day is not really a big deal. You know, people just take time to drive off of work. They just go drop their vote and come back, which is why those levels are so low. People aren't really super incentivized, super excited to do it. But if election day were to become a national holiday, then who knows, maybe one day we could have huge celebrations and fiestas going down the street. Election day would be something every kid looks forward to watch the parades come down the street. Election day would motivate people to vote. And eventually, if we were to implement election day as a national holiday, voter turnout here in America would be significantly higher than what it is today.
Puerto Rico's
Hope that helped.
Awesome. Looks like we actually have a question from the YouTube Live. Why is voter turnout a bigger issue now than it used to be?
I can take this question. I feel like as society is starting to develop, there are a lot of big issues at hand, i.e. currently in the 2020 election, a lot of the big things that are going on are one, racial equality. Presidents are going to handle them differently. There's climate change, which science has proven will be extremely detrimental to future generations if we don't like handle it properly. And there's also the things of like basic human rights, such as like the right to an abortion, which is going to be strongly affected through like placing supreme, like it enables voters to have an incentive to come for these issues, and able to have a larger voter turnout and gain like the popular vote of voters.
Hi, so I had another question. I believe in response to Grace's question at the beginning, when talking about why people would have more time off if election day was a national holiday, you said that because now students would have the day off, their parents would also have to stay home and work. But if in the status quo you have low-income families who can't take time off of work to go and vote, why is it a good thing then to make them mandated to stay home and take care of their kids and then miss out on those wages?
I mean, there are a lot of private companies who still like pay their employers on national holidays, i.e. like a lot of companies still play to like pay their employees on holidays such as the 4th of July, because they know that a lot of families are required on this income, and as they like don't want to take away of their basic family needs.
But what's requiring them to pay their employees instead of just having them unpaid day off?
We're not making that claim that it's required, but it has been seen that employers do pay their employees on national holidays when they take off.
Awesome. So I had a question going back to what Samuel said during his speech. I remember one of the problems that he pointed out as being like a barrier between people getting access to polling places was that a lot of them are too far away or they simply aren't available at all. So how will that be resolved by making election day a national
lot
holiday?
of the issues of polling stations being understaffed are as a result of that they necessarily don't have enough volunteers who are willing to go ahead and like stay at these voting locations, make sure everything runs smoothly. Through making election a national holiday and mandating that all these people do not have to work on this day, a lot of people have their schedules free and will have the opportunity to go to these polling locations and volunteer. This mass of volunteers will spill over into the building and development of more polling locations.
All right. Thank you guys. So I think that was a pretty substantial amount of questions. I think we got some ground covered rather, and some holes filled maybe in our understanding of the proposal. So thank you, debaters. Let's everybody give them a round of applause for the proposal. It was certainly a good job. And of course, I would like to remind everybody in the live chat, everybody watching the YouTube stream, that even as they're talking, the live chat, it's not interrupting anything. So if you put it in the chat, we'll archive it, and then we can ask that before the grand crossfire. All right. So at this time, I'm going to yield the floor to our second team, comprised of Katie, Grace, and Atticus. So take it away, guys.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Okay, awesome. Voting and voter participation play an integral role in the effectiveness of a democracy. However, Pew Research Center in 2016 tells us that 14% of registered voters said they didn't vote in 2016 because they were too busy due to work or prior obligations. But the problem is, a blanket solution without increpid details is never going to fill that void that we're trying to argue for. The question of how to increase accessibility for those voters who are unable to vote on election day. There is one overarching problem that we need to discuss. A federal holiday doesn't always necessitate more accessibility, and we see that in three primary areas that require improvement. First, not all companies give paid leave for their national holiday, would give public sector workers the day off. This group only consists of roughly 15% of the entire workforce. And although states like California, Minnesota, and Maryland mandate companies give time off for their employers, many other states like Georgia, Massachusetts, and Wisconsin don't. This means that workers in the private sector across the nation would still lack access to voting. This could have the unintended consequence of skewing voter turnout towards white-collar workers and those who can afford the time and money to take off work, leaving blue-collar and low-income families to suffer the most, as private companies aren't required to give their workers a break. Not to mention low-income families that would also have to arrange some kind of child care for their kids as schools would be closed. People that are already significantly marginalized and disenfranchised, like African Americans and Latinx voters, who would most likely not have time off, don't live in states where accessibility to go to the polls. Not only does this de-incentivize the average voter from taking time off to work, but this also disproportionately hurts low-income voters, as those are the voters that would still be left across by today's resolution.
Second, simply creating a national holiday doesn't necessitate the ability for everyone to vote because of barriers like complicated voter registration in the US. Even if all employees had time off to go vote, not everyone could vote unless they had registered a month beforehand. This portion of the population is significant because roughly 20% of the voting eligible population never registers to vote. We trail most developed countries when it comes to the number of Americans of voting age who actually vote. However, when it comes to the turnout of registered voters, we're one of the best in the world. One of the reasons why there's such a lack of registration is either due to perceived inconvenience or simply a lack of resources explaining how the process works. And because most states don't have automatic or same-day voter registration laws, by the time it comes to election day, many people, even if they wanted to vote and had the time to, still wouldn't. They hadn't already registered a month beforehand. Even if the actual day of elections were made a national holiday, this group of people still wouldn't be able to vote.
And the third problem that we see is that even if Election Day was made into a national holiday, voter suppression laws would still limit a large number of people from casting their ballot. In fact, the American Bar Association explains in June of 2020 that the reason non-voters are disproportionately low-income minorities is because of state voter suppression laws. These can look like a lot of things. For instance, in Georgia, they have voter ID requirements where an individual's voting status could be suspended if the name on their driver's license or social security verification form. Policies like these are under the guise of preventing voter fraud, but mainly serve to bar young non-white voters from participating. Of the 51,000 individuals that this law affected in 2018, 80% of them were Black Americans. Other factors like non-translated options for ballots, unequal polling site distributions in left-leaning minority communities, and government-registered voter ID requirements also contribute to this disparity. Although some people may see more accessibility if Election Day was a national holiday, it still wouldn't be guaranteed a path to the polling booth. Until these restrictions are actually lifted, progress will only continue to be stalled. And we have a few recommendations for things that could be implemented alongside with making a national holiday to remedy these issues.
The first is to incentivize all 50 states to require paid leave to all workers on Election Day. Some states right now already have laws that mandate private corporations give their employees paid leave on Election Day. We think that there are a few ways to incentivize states and businesses to take local representatives to pass laws in state legislatures, giving tax credits to businesses, for example, who mandate this or require this on the state level.
Second thing we could do is also recommend the aiding of accessibility of voting by instituting automatic voter registration. Some states like Nevada and Oregon have instated automatic voter registration, which has allowed for voters to vote on Election Day, regardless of prior registration. In 2015, Oregon, instead of requiring citizens to register to vote, made it so that any qualified citizen who has an interaction with the DMV, like registering a vehicle or getting an ID, is automatically added to the voter roll. In total, 272,000 people were registered this way, and more than a third of them voted in 2016. Turnout in Oregon increased 4% from 2012 to 2016. This would eliminate the problem of voter registration that is a barrier to voting accessibility.
And the third thing we would do is support the removal of these voter suppression laws. By removing the laws that deter low-income voters from voting, we're able to increase voting accessibility. And we would incentivize states like Georgia to remove those laws, such as the one with the requirement for IDs, so that individuals would be able to vote.
In conclusion, we fundamentally agree that Election Day should be a national holiday. We also recognize that this isn't a perfect blanket solution to the issues of accessibility facing Americans today. This problem of accessibility is one that we must address in order to have a fruitful democracy.
All right. Thank you, guys. That was really well said. Let's all give them a round of applause. All right, fantastic. So we are now once again going to open up to the live chat. So if you're hearing me now, I know there's a small delay. Type in the live chat. Let's amend the way we did last time, so we don't have to sit in silence. So while we're waiting on the live chat to roll in, we're going to go ahead and start with debater questions. So Siddharth and Samuel, you guys ask away. If anybody else thinks of a question, I asked one last time, so I guess all bets are off now. Just go ahead, guys.
I can start. So you talked about how you want to instate automatic voter registration. How does this prohibit the concept of state suppression laws, such as the one you listed, where a driver's license wouldn't be the same as the one on voter registration? Citizens to sign up to vote, that it will be the same name verbatim.
Right, so we recognize both of those issues as problems in the status quo, which is why we also enumerated both of those as potential solutions to problems that we see of a lack of accessibility in the status quo. We would advocate both for the repealing of voter suppression laws and then also for the increased accessibility in voter registration, like same day or automatic voter registration. We don't think these are mutually exclusive, and we also think that they can happen alongside making Election Day a national holiday.
So so you can go.
Okay, thanks. So you guys said that you would support the repealing of these voter suppression laws. Do you guys believe that this could affect the purpose those laws were instated in the first place, such as to prevent voter fraud?
There is no evidence of substantial voter fraud, so these laws are completely meaningless.
Also, in addition to what Atticus said, like I stated when I was speaking, at the point where they're disproportionately hurting these low-income communities, I think it's valid that they should be removed.
When you like in your speech, you talked about how you want to deter all voter suppression laws and like prohibit them from being instated again. What about voter suppression laws targeted at not like ex-felons, rapists, child predators, etc.?
If you're talking about like laws in the status quo that prohibit felons from being able to vote, we think that's also like a separate discussion in and of itself. What we're mainly talking about is like US citizens who do in the status quo under laws today and should have the accessibility to vote, but because of individual state voter registration laws, find that accessibility hard to reach, and then their polls don't actually count.
Okay, thank you. You also talked about how one of your other recommendations was to incentivize states to give paid leave to all workers. Where will states get the funding for this?
So in most cases right now where states do have this like policy in place, it's not like the state's taking money out of their funds to pay these workers. In most cases, it's the companies that actually pay. I think in most cases, the only time when like the state or government would pay is like for these public sector workers that actually like most of them do get days off during like national holidays anyway. We're just saying that private sector workers should also be incentivized to get the day off.
Piggybacking off of that, so what you talk about, like including private companies as well. There are several private companies where like their profit is very low and are struggling to survive, and as a result, don't have the fundings to go pay leave to the workers. How do you stop this like resolution of yours to give states paid leave from only benefiting big companies that will only benefit white collar workers?
Right, so if we're talking about small businesses, I'd say, of course, this doesn't apply to every single small business in America, but the vast majority do have a lot more lenient policies when it comes to their workers than huge corporations like Walmart who don't give paid leave on federal holidays. Most of these like mom and pop shops typically will give their employees paid leave on normal holidays, federal holidays, and even currently on election day. So I don't think it's like as big of a problem.
How
Yeah,
large of a barrier? But,
I was going to interrupt for just a second because we actually had a question from the chat.
Yes, it actually goes along with that pretty well. So would you still want to make it a national holiday even if you couldn't get people to get paid on that leave?
I think our side would say yes. Obviously, like even if it's not going to be like a perfect solution for everyone to be able to vote, like making it a national holiday would still incentivize some voters to go out and vote, which I think is obviously a great thing. We just think that like in a lot of cases it won't fix everything, and like we're just talking about like the best solution, and this could help that solution be better.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. And there's another one that kind of also ties
Yes, we got one from Jacob. What is the cost of implementing these laws and how will it be afforded?
So costs for things such as like automatic voter registration or the removal of voter suppression laws or requiring private corporations to follow a specific policy, we really don't think are going to be super resource dependent or are going to take up a lot of funds from governments or taxpayers in the long run, especially because a lot of these things, the institution of things like voter suppression laws requires more resources to go into these departments so they can check back on. So in the end, in things like that, you would on automatic voter registration or same-day voter registration, the extent of resources needed for that is typically just like the setup of a government database and a few more government employees to monitor that. It's really not super cost dependent or cost heavy.
Thank you. All right, now we can go. I think that's all the questions from the chat, so we can go back to debater questions for a little bit. And then yeah. So
in the beginning of your speech, you talked about how voter registration played a big barrier in like implementing election day as a national holiday. How big of a barrier does it play? Because it sounds like this is more of a problem of ICE and like immigration services.
So Atticus stated in his speech that in your speech you stated that about half of the voting population don't vote. We say that of that voting population that never votes, roughly 20% of them don't vote because they were never able to get like registered to be a voter, right? And in a lot of those cases, it's for reasons like they just didn't want to vote, of course, but in some cases they forgot, they showed up and they didn't know they had to register and stuff like that. We think that in those cases, if those voters get to vote, that's an increase of people, and we're increasing access for those individuals.
So clearly, these voter suppression laws were mandated for a specific reason. So how exactly will legislators be influenced to mandate that, like, not only our states suppression laws?
Right. So we don't think like actually tangibly implementing the solution is going to be easy, especially in states like Georgia, for instance, where there's already been a huge rallying cry to tear down these voter suppression laws, yet the state government there still hasn't done much to actually turn that into any tangible or legislative progress. We think in general, though, that any additional voices we can add to them as a whole, like talking about it during today's debate, is always going to be a step in the right direction for aiding campaigns or aiding programs that are currently targeting state governments like that to try and get them to repeal those voter suppression laws. If we're talking about like if those laws were there for a specific purpose, they are implemented under the guise currently of trying to stop voter fraud. But as I think both Grace and Atticus have said before, voter fraud has no like tangible problem in the status quo. There isn't really much evidence to support that. And in actuality, the policies only really hurt lower income, typically young minority people.
All right. Are there any final questions? We're gonna start wrapping up this questioning period. So, any final questions before we take a short 5-minute intermission and then regroup? All right. So thank you guys. As for the viewers of live stream, please stay tuned. We will be back in 5 minutes of the Grand Crossfire, where we will be talking about all sorts of things, answers to the questions, the actual speeches, ideas, and where we're going moving forward. So definitely stay tuned for that. And we are now going to take that 5-minute intermission. So we will be right back. All right, and we are back. Welcome back. Excuse me. Welcome back, everybody, from the intermission. I hope you stuck with us. If not, it's an archive. It'll be an archive, so you can just you viewers can just kind of skip past that 5 minutes, not just sit there in silence. So welcome back. We are going to be transitioning into that grand crossfire portion of the debate, where our debaters they're really going to be talking about and zeroing in on the finer details, talking about solutions, and talking about just the topic as a whole, and in a real open forum. Excuse me. All right. But before we go into that, I believe there was one question that we actually missed from the live chat. Let's read that off.
Yeah, sure thing. It was for everybody, actually. It doesn't have to be for one specific side or another. How could you make the holiday more relevant to the younger generation who might be unable to vote?
And that's actually a great segue to starting the crossfire. So let's start with that.
I mean, I think in the status quo, there are already like a huge young voter populace who is really excited, especially to vote in this upcoming election, and who is really excited to just participate in voting and participating in American democracy as a whole. I think in general, one of the best avenues to access this demographic, though, is probably through, like, as cliche on social media, specifically events. The importance of voter registration, the importance of going to the polls helps a lot in engaging people who might not know how that process works and who gets it just from scrolling through their timeline.
I think something that would also really benefit is like both a problem that Samuel and Siddharth identified is like the problem of not having enough poll workers for this election. I know that something in my county that they're doing is they're allowing like a bunch of high schoolers to train as poll workers and work there. So if they had the school day off, they can also, that'd be more accessible to them. So it would help them participate.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Katie said earlier about using social media as a tool. I feel that making it a national holiday when it was to be like advertised on TV, like certain things like Christmas weekend or Martin Luther King Jr., like that entire like President's Day weekend, or we have like Indigenous Peoples Day weekend for things like events and shows, and showing through these events will spill over into like social media, which would bring awareness to the younger generation who will like bring awareness of why it's important to vote.
Yeah, and then to add on to what Grace was saying earlier about what her county was doing in regards to like letting high schoolers train and become poll workers if they're given school day off. And I think if you're wondering, well, what is the incentive for high schoolers to do this? Couldn't they just stay home and like watch Netflix or something? Well, a lot of people or a lot of high school students are part of various different volunteering organizations, or that be like Key Club, Beta Club, and I think it varies by the state that you're in. But there's definitely an organization that involves and encompasses volunteering and community service. And if you're volunteering and working at a poll and helping that out, then that definitely counts as a service and giving back to your community. So not only do you get volunteering hours for it, which is just a little add-on to the main goal of, hey, I'm giving back to my community, and that's a great satisfaction to many people.
All right. That's very well said. So we can, if you guys want to, we can transition from the topic of youth and just go back into that greater topic of how exactly are we going to be able to flesh out this, and let's talk about some more of those finer details. So I know that Katie, Grace, and Atticus, you guys brought up some good points of things and oversights that could be added to making Election Day a federal holiday, because that's kind of a vague statement. So if you guys could talk, a little bit more about that, a little bit more about what needs to be added in the detail, and then Samuel and Siddharth, definitely. You guys were very headstrong. You did a very good presentation, so feel free to add to that, whatever you feel.
Right, so we think just as a basis, making Election Day a national holiday already does like a pretty decent job of opening up accessibility for people who may not be able to take time off of work in the status quo, or for public employees. But we do think that contacting like local or state representatives, especially in the state legislature, to pass legislation that actually directly makes it so that private corporations are mandated to give their workers paid leave, which a lot of states already have in the status quo for national holidays, would definitely be a good step in making sure that this act.
Absolutely. And does anybody want to add on to that? So if not, what I think we can go into is, so as a lot of you may or may not know, what we do here at SLAC, because this is all pretty new, is, and you were just talking about it, Katie, so that's fantastic. We have this discussion, and then from here we're going to get some ambassadors, and then our ambassadors are going to talk to change makers who are big influencers, policymakers, legislators. So what I'm really asking is, what terms need to be specifically pushed for? Obviously, in politics, you might not get 100%, but what are some things that really need to be talked about when making this a national holiday? And how does it compare to other national holidays, and how the country kind of operates around those?
Yeah, so I think the Katie, Grace, and Atticus had a really, really good point that I liked about how we should incentivize all 50 states to implement these laws to give to make companies provide paid leave, which I think is one of the really, really big factors holding off people from a wide range of spectrum. So like whether it be white collar, blue collar workers, a lot of their companies do not provide paid leave for Election Day national holiday. So I think, like they said, incentivizing these 50 states to implement some sort of thing like this would be a really, really great idea.
Yeah, I feel like piggybacking off of what Siddharth said, they bring up a lot of good points of like what we should present to legislators, but I feel like a lot of what their claims are will never be like be resolved if we make election a national holiday. I.e., once like they make this claim about mandating that states like give paid leave to all workers, rather awareness of how many low-income families will be like affected by this, I feel like inevitably legislators will result in passing legislation that will enable like paid leave to be mandated. I feel like when we present to these legislators, having too much on a plate at once, including like all their like proposals that we should, as I said earlier, a lot of like these state sanctioned voter registration laws are implemented for a reason, and legislators will be very hesitant to remove all of these at once. I feel like we should start off by passing making election day national holiday and let their reforms to it inevitably like ooze through.
I mean, I do think that like I would be obviously super happy if that ended up happening, if once making Election Day a national holiday, suddenly every single state legislator were to pass these types of reforms that we talked about. But even though it's the best case scenario, I don't know if it's the most likely case scenario, because a lot of these legislators are already aware of some of the barriers that people inside of their own municipalities or states face when trying to go to the polls, but lacking the accessibility, the time, making something a national holiday, although on a company level, maybe like the employers would decide to give their employees paid leave, it doesn't do that. So like, for example, for a lot of other national holidays like President's Day or Columbus Day, states don't have any type of stipulations towards private companies on that you have to give your employers time off. And I think that it's like also something that can be implemented by a lot of states as long as like somebody brings it up. Like California and Minnesota, their state laws on election day require that as long as the employee notifies their employer that they'd like to take time off from work on election day to go out and vote, their employer is then mandated to give them that time off to go and vote. So like it's something that other states can do. I think that we do need to be the ones to bring it up though, and not necessarily just rely on like natural change to take its place.
Rather, I'm not necessarily
Absolutely.
saying that we
No, go ahead, Samuel.
I'm not necessarily saying that we should rely on a form of national change, but I feel like a lot of these issues will like be brought up by people who are affected. Like if we make election day a national holiday and people are affected, like certain groups of people aren't affected by like making by like not mandating that they get paid leave, a lot of worker unions will come together and strive for this. So I feel like necessarily making it like the legislator's job will like be very counterproductive, but rather enabling the people to speak up on these issues and mandate to their employers that they get paid leave will be more efficient.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna allow you to respond to that, Katie, but I would just like to take this time because it ties in perfectly, and I want to say it at some point. Obviously, we're talking about elections, so if you're watching this and you're unsure of what you're doing on November the 3rd, or actually in North Carolina, which is where I am, we have early voting. I would like to just throw in this reminder: please, please, please go vote. That is how our democracy survives. So I just wanted to add that as my little 2 cents here. Please go vote.
Just bouncing off of that, I mean, I do think like a lot of companies have taken it already upon themselves seeing issues from their employees that are like, hey, we want time off to go and vote because currently we're not able to participate in America's democracy. But you also see a lot of large corporations who like prioritize profit over the people who work for them and don't give time off even when trying to advocate for them to. Like, for example, I forgot how long ago, but there was a huge movement to get large corporations to give their employees time off. And like companies like Walmart never ended up implementing those policies or practices into their business model because at the end of the day, it would lose them more money. And it's not like it would actually give them any sort of monetary benefit. So I don't think we can necessarily rely on like, obviously it's a great thing for individuals to take upon their own activism to form larger groups to create more discussion, but I don't think we can rely on the change to be requested and made at the company level. I think it has to come from kind of an authoritative governmental level who has more of a vested interest in the people probably than large corporations do.
And I would
Certainly
disagree.
Very, very unique viewpoints. Now, we don't want to talk in circles here. So I understand what both of you guys are saying, and clearly that's 2 very different approaches. But I think the root of it is, Samuel, you're saying that people need to be petitioning their government, and people need to be petitioning the companies and unionizing and doing that sort of thing and convincing the company to be more ethical. And Katie, you're saying that people need to, that rather the government needs to create legislation to be more authoritative figure. Do I have it correct? Wonderful. So maybe I think the solution here is that the bottom line, the common denominator is people spreading their voice. So if you have people that are dissenting against the company that they work for and are unionizing, and they're also talking to their politicians, to their legislators that are supposed to be representing them, that would be pretty much the same response, just talking to 2 different groups, and that would accomplish both of what you guys are talking about. So moving forward, I think that I just want to pose a question to everybody. What are some tools that we can use in the 21st century that allow us to kind of spread this information that, I've learned a little bit. I did pretty substantial research before this debate, and even I learned a little bit listening to both of your speeches. So in the 21st century, what can we do to kind of spread this information and to let people know these issues and how we can possibly solve them?
I think Katie touched on this earlier, but I feel like social media is a very big tool that can be very useful in bringing in very young voters And I feel like young voters as a result will tell their older electives, like as we see now, a lot of social media and like protests, one of the biggest reasons that older people are brought into it are as a result of their younger relatives. So I feel like through things like making election day a national holiday, as I touched on earlier, it will be widely advertised on TV. So I touched on this very early in our speech. In our first speech, talking about how other countries, when it was mandated a national holiday, there were parades such as the one that we see in front of Macy's on both Christmas and Thanksgiving.
Absolutely, absolutely, guys. And social media is a very powerful tool. Would anybody else like to add anything? Or keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to be talking about the exact thing that we're talking at hand. But if you just want to start a new conversation, kind of refocus us somewhere, feel free to jump in. And that's really open that.
Yeah, so I think, like Samuel said, social media and like all these television channels are a really, really great way to appeal to younger voters. But I also think that, money talks. So like if you were to incentivize, I think Katie mentioned this in her section of the speech earlier on, that if you advertise or like promote like companies or the government to give like tax breaks or tax returns for companies to give their employees time off to go vote, I think that would really, really, really help like motivate companies much more to go and actually give their employees the time off to go vote rather than just like a mandated law.
Absolutely. So sort of you're talking about an incentive, because we've talked a lot about removing the decentive, but you're talking about actually creating and then an incentive to go vote. All right. And what does everybody think about that? I mean, that's
Like
really an opinion question. Yep.
Like as making Election Day a national holiday would kind of sensationalize it in effect.
Yeah, I think that's what Cedric was saying to a point. But also he was talking about creating some other sort of, if I'm interpreting what he said correctly, creating some other sort of financial incentive or stipend for voting and participating in the democratic process.
So
Yeah.
Grace, did you want to add something?
yeah, I was just gonna say, taking that and taking what Katie said and going back to what Siddharth said during his speech, he said that making it a national or holiday would like increase voter turnout because it's gonna like provide an allocated day for people to go. And I just was thinking that like, it's already an allocated day. Like election day is already pretty like people like go out and vote. They have the stickers, people are posting about it. It's already something that's pretty sensationalized. I think just like making a national holiday would like make it another step. So I don't think it would really. I feel like if it did offer an incentive, it wouldn't be too huge of an incentive because it's all. I think rather than like focusing on incentive, de-incentive, stuff like that, I think what we should be doing is like maybe like just trying to remove the barriers, right? Because I think like actively like the best way to incentivize people is to like take away the de-incentives, and like when there are active barriers that are preventing people from going out to vote, then like that's a de-incentive. So I think some things that I talked about before, I think another really important thing is like if not automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration could also serve to help election day and then making a national holiday, because then it's like I feel like it adds on to like the excitement if that's what we're going for, like the sensational of like making it a national holiday, because then it's like, oh, I'm gonna go register to vote, and it's like all in the same day, and it's like pretty exciting in that sense if that's what we're going for with a national holiday.
Yeah, I think that making Election Day a national holiday as a whole probably doesn't have as much of an effect as like getting more people to know what day is Election Day and when, like what times you can go out and vote. I think what it does do is kind of also offer itself as like a window to more legislative changes in terms of election reform as a whole. Because once you bring up like one broader topic, then there's also a lot of stipulations or subsections of policies that can be discussed underneath that, which is why we also brought up ideas of like repealing modern day voter suppression laws, creating more accessible registration in terms of either automatic registration or same day registration. And I think those are things that can also be brought up in tandem with making Election Day a national holiday, and like are obviously not mutually exclusive, but kind of go really well together when it comes to like petitioning to local representatives, for example.
Absolutely. That's very well said as usual, Katie. So I would just like to thank everybody for coming. Obviously, we're not done quite yet, but we are going to, as we are getting close to wrapping up, we're going to go more into talk of policy. So we might get a little bit technical here, but now we've talked a lot about ideas, what works, what doesn't work, how we feel, the opinions, and I think this group is pretty indicative. We've got people on one side or the other of how most people feel, which I feel like is pretty good. But let's start talking about actual policy implementation. What do we need to be saying to our legislators? And anyone feel free to jump in on that one.
Yeah, so sorry, Kate, you can go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. I was just gonna jump in if no one else wanted to, but you go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna do the same thing too. All right, so this is really generic, and I think it's a good place if I go ahead and say this so we can start building off of it. So I think what we've decided as a group, let me know if I'm mistaken, is that we need to make Election Day a national holiday. However, like we discussed in both or in your speech, that since just making Election Day a national holiday is just kind of like a blanket cover, like you guys said, we need to have some more specific details in there to help those minority groups and those people whose companies don't give them time off. But whether that be like repealing voter laws, automatic polling stations, and I think we need to have those specific details in this policy of making Election Day a national holiday to really appeal and help the wider group of people.
I think something that when we are talking to like the change makers, like something to emphasize would be like how overdue it is. You know, like Election Day has been around for a really long time. It's been the same day for a really long time. You know, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. That's like been set for a really long time, and that's how it is. And I feel like it's kind of overdue to like keep it from being a national holiday because there aren't really any downsides of it, and it would like increase accessibility, which is always a good thing. In addition to that, I think we should probably like introduce the ideas that Katie Atticus and I talked about with like increasing accessibility.
And I don't know exactly how like the change maker process works, but I also think these would be discussions with like two different groups of people, because most of these policies like automatic voter registration or mandating that private corporations give their employees paid leave, or even the voter suppression laws we see right now are all instituted or all passed on a state level, whereas like making something a national holiday, obviously they would probably be like different discussions with different people, also like discussions that work in tandem but wouldn't be implemented by the same body.
Absolutely, and that is a good point. This is a multifaceted and multi-leveled approach that we have to take here to make sure that our elections are equitable, which is really the end goal here. I think I don't know. I have a question to ask as we kind of get into wrapping up here. Some states have declared Election Day as a holiday, as many of you brought up in your speeches. Have they set a good or bad precedent with that? And how does a statewide holiday kind of compare and look different from a nationwide holiday? and what approach should we be taking in the creation of our policy one way or the other?
I believe that making it a statewide national holiday doesn't necessarily hold each state to the same standard, because each state will be unable to like decide whether and like what exactly they want to do. We see this issue with like the legalization of marijuana. Like it's not necessarily federal recreational or medical marijuana. I feel that making it a national holiday would uphold all states up to the same standard. And rather than having to go state by state and like target it with all these recommendations, approaching it through a federal level, when it would just take one route and let it like spill over from there.
Yeah, I agree. Like standardization is obviously an issue that also needs to be addressed as a whole. Like for example, I think one of the states that does have Election Day as a state holiday, at least, is Virginia. But they don't give, or they don't require corporations to give their employees time off for voting. And if they do, then those companies don't have to pay their employees any type of wage during that time either. So like when I was talking about earlier with instituting these reforms on a state level, obviously I think that's going to be what's most in reach. But if we could like implement automatic voter registration on a national level, that's obviously best case scenario, because then you also don't have disparities between states on what their policies are, which could leave like some states getting more representation and more accessibility for their voters and other states did. So I agree with you, Samuel.
Did anybody else want to add something? Thank you guys, by the way.
I wanted to add that states making it a state holiday, making Election Day a state holiday, sets a good example. I think Sam brought up the example of marijuana, and it's shown in many states that legalizing marijuana has led to a lot more taxes and better stuff for the state, and that's why other states are thinking about legalizing marijuana. But applying that to Election Day, in Virginia, the turnout in 2016 was 72%, while the national was 55%. So states look at this and they see, wow, that's higher. So they'll be more inclined to make Election Day state holiday.
Absolutely. Thank you, Atticus.
I think the medical marijuana case is something that's really interesting because there was that court case that was like Gonzalez versus Reich or something. And it was like under that court case, like it gave the national government the power under like both like the commerce and supremacy clause like together, right? Like the national law would be like supreme over the state law of like legalizing marijuana because the national law was like, oh, you can't do that. But I think like in this case, it's interesting because like if we are pursuing like a national with like some state solutions as well, it's like the concurrent like federal like system kind of where like we have the national policy like making a national holiday on like the big national federal level, but then also we have state solutions that would help, and like they work well with each other. And I think they'd both be like good solutions to impact.
All right, thank you. Well said. And it certainly is an interesting comparison to draw. While it's obviously not the same topic, the issue between the state's ability to legislate and the effects of that compared to the federal government and the laws and regulations as they set, it is definitely something that is very important to many Americans, and it's certainly important to elections. I think moving into this election year, this is a very, we'll use the word tense election. And you really begin to see the differences between how some states conduct their elections and others, and even the primary elections and all the differences with that. So it's definitely an interesting comparison to be drawn. As we are kind of nearing close here, I want to get us one like short comment from everybody before we head out. And obviously after this discussion, we are going to be in correspondence with you guys, talking about what we talked about. We've got minutes, so we're going to really hit on all those points. In correspondence, we're going to get some ambassadors, and then the next time that you guys, the audience, will see us, will be on that Change Maker Forum panel. So look forward to that. But like I said, as we're nearing close, I just like to collect, one statement from everybody. So I think we're all the consensus here that election day should be a holiday. Now, I just want to kind of go down the line and see what would you add to that? What condition would you add, or how could you make that statement? How could you tweak that statement just a bit to be more sensible policy? And I think we're just going to go down the list as it appears on my Zoom screen, so it might be different a bit. But we're going to start with Samuel, but I'll give you guys like 10 seconds to think.
I feel like at the end of the day, we should make Election Day a national holiday while also striving to incentivize states to give paid leave to all workers.
Thank you. All right. So he said federal holiday and then paid leave in addition to that. All right, Atticus?
Well, we all agree that Election Day should be a national holiday. There are many alternative solutions that could be used with that solution, such as ranked choice voting, which we did mention, but repealing voter suppression laws and replacing them with a more uniform standard of laws.
Thank you, Atticus. Katie?
Just also coinciding with what everyone else has said, obviously, Election Day should be a national holiday, but it's also important to look at trying to both standardize what's happening across states and just decreasing the barriers that people face in general, like through voter suppression laws and a lack of registration accessibilities.
Thank you, Katie. Grace?
If I had to pick, I would also say making Election Day a national holiday. And then I think one really important one that I would like to focus on is the same day voter registration, or at least automatic voter registration or something like that. Just remove the barriers.
All right, thank you, Grace. And then finally, last but not least, Siddharth.
Yeah, so I think this is basically the same as everyone else said, but Election Day should definitely be a national holiday with a few implementations. So I think although all the points that we discussed in today's debate would idealistically be amazing if we could implement all of them, but since you have to tone down a little bit and think from a more technical perspective, I think Election Day, which would, along with incentives for states to mandate companies to provide paid leave for their employees, would be something that I would really, really hope would happen in the near future.
All right. I think that is going to conclude our debate. Everybody give yourselves a round of applause. All right. All right. Wonderful. Great, guys. That was some excellent synthesis there at the end. I think that we actually got quite a bit accomplished today. So like I said, our audience, they'll be in the dark for a little bit. They're going to see us again when we've reconvened at our Changemaker panel. So definitely stay tuned and we'll keep you posted on that. But before we close, I'm going to actually pass it over to our CEO, Nandini, and she is going to make an announcement.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to all of our debaters, our audience, our moderators, Kaden and Mila. It was definitely a very, very interesting and engaging conversation, and we got a lot done. So that's our goal here at the end of the day. I do want to make a big announcement. So SLAC, the Student Leadership Association for Change, this is our 5th month since we've launched, but we're now excited to announce the opening of our Texas, Florida, and New York chapters. Actually, we have our Texas director here, Katie. Quick, just wave again. I guess turn your mic on and say hi, because the viewing is a little bit weird on the screen.
Hi, everyone.
Yes, so we're so excited to have her here with us. And then our other 2 chapter directors, Jacqueline and Connor, they aren't able to be with us here today, but you'll hear from them soon. So those of you in those respective states, hopefully you guys decide to join your state chapters. And if any of you are interested or have friends in other states that are totally into this cause, we would love for you guys to reach out to us. And we're totally open to working with you guys in your respective states as well. So congratulations, everyone. We've done some pretty amazing things.
Let's give everybody else, once again, just another round of applause. Great job, guys. Thank you for coming. really quickly, I wanted to announce the next two debate topics. So, and I'm really glad you guys actually touched on them in your comments and in your speeches. So I'm really happy about that. But the next debate topic, which we talked about quite a bit, is actually going to be automatic voter registration, or opt-out voter registration, where, you know, as we talked about, we're trying to overcome those boundaries. So we want to allow people to be able to vote and to be able to register easily, and for that to be accessible to everyone. So that is the next topic. And then from there, we're actually going to talk about ranked choice voting as a concept, as an idea, and maybe for implementation of how that works and how that happens. So that's what our election timeline is looking like in our election series of debates. And if you guys, viewers, are interested in joining those debates, sign up on our website, which is slacpolicies.org. That is SLACPOLICIES.org. And you can sign up for the debate there, and you can be one of these lovely people who are on the Zoom call with us. And of course, before we close, follow us on social, at SLAC Policies on Twitter and Instagram. Obviously, you've made it to the YouTube page. Go ahead and hit subscribe. And I think that's going to be it, guys. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. And then please consider participating in our next debate. Consider joining the organization. All right. I think that's going to close today. Anybody else have anything to say? Wonderful. All right. See you guys.
Thank you so much.
If everyone could stay on just for like a